I still remember the day the divorce papers arrived like it was yesterday, though in truth, every day since has felt like a slow-motion crash I couldn't stop. There was a knock at the door that morning, soft but urgent, like a warning I didn't want to hear. I opened it to the mail carrier, who handed me the envelope with a polite nod, and as soon as I saw the return address, a cold knot twisted in my stomach. My heart didn't race, there wasn't even a pulse, but it sank straight down to a pit where hope used to live. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter and stared at it. The ticking of the wall clock was louder than I'd ever noticed, each second hammering the reality I didn't want to face. For a long moment, I just stood there, pretending to be busy with nothing, watching my daughter's school shoes lined up by the door and the tiny coat she refused to hang properly. It was absurd how life's little details suddenly felt so cruel, so painfully ordinary in the middle of a moment that would shatter everything. I tore open the envelope with hands I didn't recognize as mine. The crisp paper crackled like glass breaking. The words jumped out at me, petition for divorce. And suddenly, the whole room was spinning, not with anger, not even with sadness, but with the hollow, numbing disbelief that comes when you realize your life, the one you thought was secure, is no longer yours to hold. I sank into the kitchen chair, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles whitened. I kept reading, trying to understand how we had arrived here. I tried to remember the last argument, the last cold shoulder, the last time I had laughed at a joke she made. And what I saw wasn't enough to explain this. I had been working. Always working. Late nights at the office. Business trips. Meetings I couldn't skip. I had told myself it was for us, for our future, for stability. But as I sat there, staring at the official words that now defined our future without my consent, I realized I had been absent far more than I had ever admitted, even to myself. My daughter's footsteps echoed from the living room. She was 7, which feels like the perfect age to still believe in magic, yet old enough to notice when the ground beneath her parents begins to crumble. She peeked around the corner, her small face full of cautious curiosity. "Daddy," she said softly, almost afraid to disturb the storm gathering in my chest. "Are you mad?" I forced a smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. Mad? No, surprised. Surprised is a weak word, but it's the closest I could come to truth without collapsing completely in front of her. She lingered, hesitant, like she wanted to step closer but feared she'd fall into something she couldn't understand. I wanted to scoop her up, tell her everything would be fine, tell her I would fix it even if I didn't believe it myself. But I didn't. I just sat there, feeling the weight of my own failures pressing me into the chair. Later that morning, when she went to school, I tried to focus on work. I told myself I would call the lawyer, I would fight, I would figure it out. But no amount of spreadsheet analysis or client emails could distract me from the echoing question: how did it come to this? It wasn't like our marriage had been perfect. There had been cracks, sure. Small things at first, disagreements over bills, over whose turn it was to take her to school, over dinner choices. But I had convinced myself those were trivial. She had tried to talk, to communicate, and I had been deaf, absorbed in deadlines, projects, and the relentless drive to succeed at work. I told myself she'd understand, that love wasn't about the small details, that stability meant more than affection. I was wrong. The next time I saw her, my wife, not my daughter, was in the living room that evening. She stood there like a statue, holding the divorce papers I had left on the counter earlier, her face a mask of exhaustion and finality. I tried to smile again. I tried to pretend I understood, that I could somehow charm my way back into the life I had neglected. "You saw them," she said, voice steady but sharp. "You know why they're here." "Yes," I admitted, my voice breaking slightly despite my efforts. "But I think I understand. Maybe I haven't been enough." Her eyes softened for a second, a ghost of the woman I fell in love with, but then hardened again. "It's more than that," she said. "It's everything. The distance. The silence. The nights I spent feeling alone while you were at some meeting that, frankly, never mattered as much as you thought it did." I nodded, the lump in my throat catching every word she said. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to say that I worked to give her and our daughter a life of comfort, but the truth sounded hollow in my own ears. I had been absent in the moments that counted, invisible when I should have been present, and she had seen it all. I thought back to the mornings she had tried to wake me for school drop-offs, the evenings I missed bedtime stories, the countless times my daughter had asked me to play with her and I had promised, later, as if later was a guarantee I could deliver. All those laters added up to a wall between us that I hadn't noticed until now. My daughter came home that afternoon. She seemed quieter than usual, and I watched her as she put her backpack down, peeled off her shoes, and looked at me with a seriousness that no 7-year-old should carry. She climbed onto the couch beside me and rested her head on my shoulder. "Daddy," she whispered, "will you still read me a story tonight?" I swallowed hard. "Of course," I said, forcing the words into a steady cadence I didn't feel. "I'll read you the story tonight." Her small hand squeezed mine, and I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost took my breath away. She didn't understand fully what was happening, but she felt the tension, the cracks in our family. I wondered if she already knew, in some innocent way, that things might never be the same. And I hated myself for that. I spent the rest of the evening pacing the apartment, trying to think through the next steps. Should I call the lawyer now? Should I beg for mediation? Should I apologize endlessly, hoping that would undo years of negligence? My thoughts raced, looping endlessly, every option feeling inadequate. Every memory of her smiling at me felt tainted, every laugh we had shared overshadowed by the looming certainty that things had changed forever. By nightfall, the apartment was quiet. My wife had gone out for some errands, leaving me alone with my thoughts, my daughter sleeping in her room, and the deafening silence that only comes when you realize that life will never look the same again. I sat on the couch, staring at the divorce papers, the words mocking me silently. Petition for divorce. 3 words that carried a lifetime of failure. And yet, somewhere deep in the pit of despair, a tiny spark flickered. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A desire to not completely lose myself, to find some way to make amends, to be the father my daughter deserved and, somehow, the man I still hoped I could be. I didn't know how I would do it. I didn't know if it was even possible. But I knew one thing. I couldn't ignore this. I couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. And more than anything, I couldn't let my daughter grow up thinking that I had abandoned her, not entirely, not emotionally. The next morning, as she bounded into the kitchen for breakfast, I tried to smile, tried to muster some semblance of normalcy. She looked up at me, eyes bright but wary. "Daddy," she said, "are we going to be okay?" Her question hit me harder than the divorce papers ever could. I didn't have the answer yet, but I promised myself I would find it. I promised that, no matter what, I would fight for the moments that mattered, for the laughter, the bedtime stories, the tiny victories that made a family. And that's when she said something I'll never forget. "Daddy, Your Honor, may I show you something he doesn't know?" I froze. Not just because of the words, but because for the first time, in the middle of everything I had lost and feared losing, there was a spark of hope. Something hidden, something real, something that my daughter knew about me that even I had forgotten. I didn't know what it was, and my heart pounded with anticipation, fear, and a desperate, almost childlike hope. Whatever it was about to change everything. It wasn't the first time I had felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring at everything I had built crumble below me. But that morning, when my daughter looked up at me with those wide, serious eyes, it felt different, personal, raw, unrelenting. She was 7, small enough to fit in my lap yet old enough to sense the fractures in a marriage she didn't understand, old enough to notice when a father was suddenly anything but invincible. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the divorce papers spread out like a storm on every flat surface. Coffee had long gone cold, untouched, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the otherwise quiet apartment. She stood there, one hand on the doorframe, peering in like a small sentinel, assessing the battlefield. "Daddy," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of hesitation and determination. Can I show the judge something?" For a moment, the world stopped. I froze mid-breath, mid-thought, mid-life, caught between panic and curiosity. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. She tilted her head, as if trying to gauge whether I would laugh or scold. Something about you. Something he doesn't know. I blinked, trying to understand. She wasn't talking about toys, or homework, or even some silly school project. No, this was different. She was talking about me. About something real. Something hidden. And for a fleeting second, I felt both a surge of pride and an edge of terror. Pride because my daughter saw something in me that maybe I hadn't even noticed. Terror because if she showed it, if she revealed it, what would everyone else see? "Sweetheart," I said cautiously, leaning forward, lowering my voice so it was just for her, "are you sure that's a good idea? Judges, they take these things very seriously. It might not be the right time." Her eyes didn't waver. "It's okay, Daddy. I want them to know. I want everyone to see." Her words struck me in a way I wasn't ready for. My daughter, just 7, understood things about honesty, about truth, about love, that I had spent years trying to rationalize away. She was brave in a way I had forgotten how to be, and suddenly, my own cowardice, my inability to show up, felt like a weight that might crush me if I didn't act. I leaned back in my chair, running my hands through my hair. I wanted to ask questions, I wanted to delay, I wanted to shield her from the adult chaos that had become our lives, but I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew this secret she wanted to show, might be my only chance to fix what I had broken. Or at least, to prove that I hadn't been entirely absent, that there were pieces of me, small but real, that mattered more than work, more than ego, more than pride. "Okay," I finally said, voice trembling despite my attempt at calm. "If you really think it's important, we'll figure out how to do it. But promise me you'll be careful, all right?" She nodded, a serious little salute that made my chest ache. "I promise, Daddy." The rest of that day passed in a blur of preparation, my mind spinning faster than I could keep up. I found myself rifling through old videos on my phone, the ones I had recorded without much thought, birthday mornings, bedtime stories, little acts of care I hadn't considered significant at the time. And for the first time in months, I felt the weight of nostalgia, of fleeting joy, and of my own absence. I had been there physically, yes, but emotionally? Half the time I had been a ghost, wandering through our home while life moved around me. When my daughter returned from school, she clutched a small tablet in her hands, the screen cracked along one corner, but functioning. She held it out to me, and I realized she had recorded something herself, something she believed captured the truth. I swallowed hard. "Daddy," she said, eyes wide, "this shows. I think it shows how much you love me even when Mom doesn't see it." Her words hit me harder than anything else in that day. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear, it wasn't guilt, it was raw, piercing love. And I realized something I hadn't admitted before. I had been fighting for everything else, career, respect, stability, while forgetting the most important fight of all, being present for my daughter, being the father she needed me to be. I sat with her on the couch, the tablet between us. She pressed play, and the tiny living room was filled with scenes of me reading to her, playing catch in the hallway, sneaking her favorite snacks when she thought I wasn't looking. Nothing spectacular, nothing grand, just me, really being there. And as the video played, I noticed the subtle things she had captured, the way my hands lingered on her shoulders when she laughed, the soft encouragements when she struggled with puzzles, the quiet nods when she confided her fears. I hadn't realized that these small, everyday moments were exactly what mattered. Not the promotions, not the meetings, not the endless hours at the office. She had noticed my presence in ways that I had taken for granted, and now, here it was, evidence of what I had always tried, even when I had failed. Tears stung my eyes, and I swallowed to keep my voice from breaking. This is incredible," I said quietly. "You put this together?" She nodded, proud but nervous. "I wanted him to know. I wanted him to see that you're not just, busy all the time." I pulled her close and held her, letting the warmth of her small body remind me of what was worth fighting for. And in that embrace, I realized that the divorce, the pain, the failures, they weren't the end. They were a mirror, showing me exactly who I was, what I had lost, and what I needed to fight for, even if I didn't yet know how. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the courtroom, about my wife, about the judge who would soon see this glimpse of who I really was. Anxiety clawed at me, but beneath it, a tiny thread of hope began to form. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment where things could start to shift, not just legally but emotionally, in the hearts of the people I loved most. I kept replaying the video in my mind, over and over. I remembered her laughter, my voice reading her favorite stories, the way I had held her hand when she was scared of the dark. And as I replayed each memory, each little act of care, I realized I had a chance, not to undo the past, never to undo it, but to prove, in undeniable terms, that my love had always been there. Hidden, perhaps, neglected, but real. When she finally fell asleep, curled up in her tiny bed, I sat in the darkness, staring at the blank ceiling. I thought about my wife, about the divorce, about the life I had constructed for success but at the cost of intimacy and presence. And I made a silent vow, when that courtroom day came, I would show them who I really was, who I had always tried to be. Not the absent father, not the stressed husband, not the career-obsessed man. They had seen the surface of me. But this was the heart of me, captured through the eyes of my daughter. I also realized something else, something that scared me more than the thought of losing my family. If I didn't step up now, truly, fully, I would never forgive myself. And I knew in that moment, even without knowing the exact words, the exact timing, or the exact path, that my daughter had given me a gift far greater than I could have imagined, a reminder of who I was, and who I could still become. And yet, beneath the flicker of hope, a shadow lingered. My wife had her own eyes on that video, her own interpretations, her own grievances. Could this small act from a child really bridge years of misunderstanding, of distance, of emotional absence? I didn't know. But I was determined to try. I had to try. For her, for my daughter, for myself. I looked over at her sleeping form, peaceful now, unaware of the battles raging in the adult world, and I whispered softly, as much to her as to myself, "I'll show them. I'll show everyone what you see, what I've been too blind to show myself." And in that quiet, darkened room, I realized that this was only the beginning. That one small video, one simple act of faith from my daughter, had set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. My daughter had given me a chance to reclaim a part of myself I had forgotten existed, a part that mattered more than success, more than pride, more than all the noise in the world. I didn't yet know how it would play out. I didn't know if it would save my marriage, if it would soften my wife, or if the judge would even consider it meaningful. But I did know this. I had been given an opportunity to fight, not with anger, not with words, not with strategy, but with truth, with love, with presence. And that was more than I had had in a long time. As I finally lay down that night, exhaustion heavy in my bones but my mind racing, I thought about tomorrow. About the courthouse. About the eyes that would be on me, watching me, judging me. And I thought about my daughter, the smallest and yet most powerful witness in the world, who had reminded me what I was capable of. I didn't know how this story would end. I didn't know the outcome. But I knew one thing with crystal clarity. Nothing in the world mattered more than showing her mother, showing the world. The father I had been, the father I could still be, the man I was determined to become. And in that quiet, fragile hope, I found the courage to face the day to come. I spent the morning like a man trying to hold back a flood with nothing but my hands. The apartment was quiet, eerily so, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The divorce papers sat on the counter, staring at me like an accusation I couldn't escape. And yet, the real weight wasn't in the papers. It was in the thoughts circling my mind, relentless, gnawing, dragging me into a pit I couldn't climb out of. Work was the first temptation to escape, the easy mask I had worn for years. I opened my laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard, pretending that emails, schedules, and conference calls could somehow make this nightmare more manageable. But each message, each notification, only reminded me how much of my life I had spent elsewhere, and how little of it had actually mattered. Promotions, deadlines, client wins, they all felt hollow now, meaningless against the backdrop of a family fracturing because I had been blind, because I had been absent. I poured a cup of coffee, only to find it had gone cold almost instantly. I took a sip anyway. Bitter. Just like the thoughts I couldn't swallow. I tried to think through the day, the next steps. Court was in 3 days. I had to be prepared for my wife, for my daughter, and, selfishly, for myself. I didn't want to be humiliated in front of everyone, didn't want to be exposed as the man who had failed to show up when it mattered most. But what terrified me more was the possibility of realizing, in front of a judge and my wife and my daughter, that I didn't deserve another chance. I dug into old folders on my laptop, looking for anything that could serve as evidence, proof, or even just a sliver of hope. And that's when I found them, the videos I had recorded over the years. Not professionally made, not carefully curated, just snippets of real life, mornings when I had woken my daughter for school, evenings reading her favorite stories, weekends spent sneaking her small treats when she thought I wasn't paying attention. And with each clip, each forgotten moment, I realized how much I had tried in the small ways that had been invisible to everyone else, even to myself. I thought about her mother, about the distance that had grown between us over the years. I remembered arguments that seemed trivial then, over bills, chores, the way the furniture was arranged, and I understood now that it was never really about those things. It had been about presence, about attention, about feeling seen. I had failed in the ways that mattered most, and I had pretended, even to myself, that it didn't hurt anyone. I thought about my daughter, 7 years old, already carrying a wisdom and courage that I envied. Her question, her simple declaration that she wanted the judge to see the real me, had shifted something in me. I realized that this wasn't just about proving my love, it was about reclaiming a part of myself I had neglected. If I couldn't fight for her, if I couldn't fight for what mattered, then what was I even doing with my life? I spent hours preparing, not just legally or strategically, but emotionally. I had to reconcile my past absence with the man I wanted to be in that courtroom. I had to face the possibility that she, my wife, might still see me as the man who put work above love, who prioritized ambition over presence. And I had to find a way to stand tall, even when the weight of failure pressed against my chest like a physical force. I practiced speaking, not to convince anyone else, but to convince myself. I love you. I have always loved you. I may have failed, but I am here now, and I am present. The words tasted foreign, heavy, but necessary. Each repetition chipped away at the fear that had lodged itself in my throat, the fear that my voice, my love, my effort would never be enough. And yet, even as I prepared, doubt lingered. Doubt about whether my daughter's video, her small but mighty testimony, would make a difference. Whether my wife would even consider the truth in it, or whether she would see it as manipulation, as desperation, as a last-ditch attempt to salvage something irreparably broken. I reached out to a friend, someone who had seen me through both professional triumphs and personal failures. He listened without judgment as I poured out my anxieties, my fears, my desperate desire to prove that I hadn't been the absentee father she thought I was. "You need to show them who you really are," he said, voice calm, measured. "Not who you've been at work. Not who you think you should be. Who you actually are, the man your daughter knows, the father she relies on. That's what matters. Nothing else." I nodded, absorbing the words like a lifeline. It was simple, almost painfully so. I didn't need legal strategies. I didn't need dramatic gestures. I needed to be present, to show up, to be real. And for the first time in months, I felt the tiniest spark of control, a fragile thread I could cling to. That evening, I practiced with my daughter. She sat beside me on the couch, tablet in hand, eyes bright with anticipation and seriousness. "Do you think it's okay, Daddy?" she asked. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the trust, the courage, the innocence that carried more weight than any argument or plea I could make. "It's more than okay," I said. "It's important. And we'll do it together." She smiled, the kind of smile that melts something deep inside you, and for a moment, I let myself believe. Believe that this tiny, seemingly insignificant act, a child showing a video, might actually matter. That it could tilt the scales, not legally, not necessarily, but emotionally, in a way that could heal or at least start the process. I thought about the courthouse, the formalities, the judge's stern expressions, my wife's cool composure. I imagined walking in, holding my head high, my daughter beside me, presenting a truth that was undeniable. And I realized that this wasn't just about the outcome of a legal proceeding. This was about reclaiming my identity as a father, as a man capable of presence, capable of love, capable of confronting failure without hiding. I spent the night watching old clips, reliving moments I had forgotten, allowing myself to feel the joy and the regret intertwined. I practiced speaking the words I would say, felt the trembling in my chest, the tightness in my throat, the tension in my hands. And with every repetition, I felt the walls around me crumble slightly, letting in something fragile but vital, hope. The next morning, I went through the motions of routine with an odd combination of nervousness and resolve. Breakfast felt like a ceremonial act, a preparation for battle I wasn't fully ready for. My daughter ate quietly, occasionally looking up at me with a smile that carried the gravity of her small but powerful intentions. "Daddy," she said between bites, "do you think they'll like it?" I chuckled softly, though my throat felt tight. "They're going to see you, sweetheart. And through you, they're going to see me. That's all that matters." And in that moment, I realized that this was more than preparation for a court date. This was preparation for redemption, for connection, for reclaiming a part of life I had almost let slip away. Every doubt, every anxiety, every regret converged into a singular focus. I had to show them, and I had to do it without pretense. Without excuses. Without the armor I had built in the world of work. By mid-afternoon, I was exhausted, mentally and emotionally. The preparation wasn't just logistical, it was existential. I had spent hours confronting who I had been, who I had failed to be, and who I wanted to become. And the strange, almost frightening truth was that I had no guarantee it would work. That the courtroom could still strip me of hope. That my wife could remain unconvinced. But I also understood that this was my one chance, not to erase the past, not to rewrite history, but to show my daughter and myself that love, presence, and authenticity could still have weight, even in a world that seemed determined to punish me for my absence. That night, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she looked up at me with a seriousness that belied her age. "Daddy, will you really show them who you are?" I paused, feeling the enormity of the moment press down on me. "Yes," I said firmly, pulling her into my arms. "I'll show them. I'll show everyone. And I'll make sure they see the truth." Her small, trusting eyes closed, and I knew that whatever happened in the courtroom, whatever judgments were passed, I had begun the journey of reclaiming my life, not through arguments, not through strategy, but through the quiet, undeniable power of love, presence, and the courage to be seen. And in the darkened room, listening to her steady breathing, I felt the first hint of resolve, a fragile but burning flame that told me the fight wasn't over. The next day, the courthouse would be waiting. My daughter would be waiting. And I finally would be ready. The morning of the hearing, the air felt heavier than usual. The kind of weight that presses on your chest, making each breath a conscious effort. I woke early, though sleep had been scarce the night before, replaced by a restless, looping montage of everything I had done wrong and everything I desperately hoped I could still make right. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak from the pipes, as if the house itself knew it was witnessing the tipping point of my life. I dressed carefully, buttoning a crisp shirt, adjusting a tie I rarely wore. The mirror reflected a face I barely recognized, tired, tense, lined with the shadows of long nights at work and longer nights of guilt. I stared into my own eyes, trying to find the man who had once been confident, capable, and proud. Somewhere in there, he existed still, but he had been buried under years of absence, distraction, and self-deception. My daughter came bounding into the kitchen, backpack bouncing on her shoulders, eyes wide with nervous excitement. "Daddy," she said, a little too brightly, as if her energy alone could mask the weight of what was coming. "Are you ready?" I knelt to meet her at eye level, forcing a smile that felt foreign. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said. "But remember, it's not just about being ready, it's about being honest. Being ourselves." Her nod was serious, almost solemn, as if she fully understood the gravity of those words, though she was only 7. She handed me the tablet, her little fingers brushing mine in a fleeting gesture that made my chest ache with both pride and fear. This small device, clunky and cracked, carried the weight of our entire emotional journey. And she trusted me to make sure it was seen. The drive to the courthouse was tense. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened, every red light and stop sign magnifying the dread in my chest. I tried to focus on the video, replaying it silently in my mind, imagining the impact it might have. But every thought spiraled back to the worst-case scenarios. What if the judge dismisses it? What if my wife remains unmoved? What if I fail again, in front of the people I am trying hardest not to fail? We entered the building, the corridors echoing with the shuffle of papers, the clicks of shoes on polished floors, the quiet murmurs of strangers going about legal business. Everything smelled of varnish, old books, and the faint metallic tang of anxiety. My daughter's hand slipped into mine, tiny but firm, grounding me, reminding me that the stakes weren't abstract, they were real. They were human. They were love. Sitting in the waiting room, the minutes stretched endlessly. Each one felt like an hour, each hour like a lifetime. I tried to compose myself, straightening my shirt, checking the tablet, rehearsing my words silently. My daughter sat beside me, quietly humming a song I remembered teaching her months ago, a melody that now felt like a lifeline tethering me to the simplest, most important truths: presence, love, honesty. When our case was called, my heart leaped into my throat. I stood, offering my daughter a reassuring smile, even though my hands trembled. "Ready?" I whispered. She nodded, and together, we stepped into the courtroom. The room was larger than I had imagined, filled with people whose gazes seemed to measure, weigh, and pass judgment on everything I had been and everything I hoped to become. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and nervous anticipation. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing, regarded us with calm authority. My wife sat across the room, composed, poised, her expression unreadable, her presence a quiet, constant reminder of all that I had neglected. I guided my daughter to stand beside me. Her small hand clutched the tablet like a shield and a key, carrying our truth into a room that had been sterile, formal, and unforgiving until that moment. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm raging inside me, to prepare for whatever came next. "Mr. Anders, are you ready?" the judge asked, her voice even but firm. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yes, Your Honor." My wife's eyes flicked toward me, brief, calculating, and then returned to the papers in front of her. I wondered if she expected me to fail, or if she was secretly hoping I would somehow prove myself. The thought made my chest tighten even further. My daughter looked up at me, her small gaze steady, unwavering. "May I show you something?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper but carrying a weight that made the room pause. The judge inclined her head. "Go ahead, young lady." My stomach twisted. This was it. The moment that would define more than a legal outcome. It would define me as a father, as a man, as someone capable of presence and love. My daughter pressed play. The video began simply. Scenes of me reading her bedtime stories, helping with homework, sneaking little treats when she thought I wasn't looking. Nothing spectacular. Nothing meant for an audience. Just us, me being present in ways I hadn't realized mattered until now. I watched my daughter's tiny face light up with each scene, and I felt a surge of both pride and fear. Pride that she had noticed these moments, fear that everyone else might see them differently, that my efforts, my love, might not translate. The courtroom shifted subtly. People leaned forward. Whispered comments rippled through the rows. My wife's hands tightened on her papers, but her eyes softened ever so slightly as she watched. The judge's face remained calm, but I could feel the scrutiny, the careful weighing of each small moment I had recorded. I realized then that this video wasn't just about the court. It was about honesty. About showing the world the man I had tried to be, flaws and all, and letting them see it through the lens of my daughter's unwavering love and perception. And then came the moments I had almost forgotten, my voice reading "Good Night Moon," my hand on her shoulder as she learned to tie her shoes, the tiny victories that had gone unnoticed but had shaped her sense of security. Each frame reminded me of the father I had tried to be, And for the first time in months, I felt a fragile sense of validation. I had been present in ways that mattered, even if imperfectly. The silence after the video was deafening. No one spoke. The judge tilted her head slightly, absorbing every detail. My wife blinked, her carefully maintained composure cracking just enough for me to see the woman I had loved, and the human who had once shared in those fleeting, beautiful moments. I wanted to speak, to explain, to justify myself, but the video did it all. It didn't require explanation, just presence. Just proof. And as I watched my daughter, standing beside me with a mixture of pride and anticipation, I realized that this was her gift. She had reminded me, and everyone in that room, that love, small and persistent, cannot be erased. The judge finally spoke, her voice breaking the stillness. This changes things. I need a moment to consider this evidence before we proceed. I exhaled, a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My daughter squeezed my hand. See, Daddy? I knew they'd understand. I swallowed, trying not to cry. Yes, sweetheart, I whispered. They see. Outside the courtroom, I felt the tension begin to release, though it didn't fully leave. I knew the battle wasn't over. There were questions to answer, decisions to be made, consequences to face. But in that moment, I felt a thread of hope, tenuous and delicate, stretching between my daughter and me, a tether that could guide me through the uncertainty ahead. We walked back to the waiting room, her small hand in mine, and I realized something profound. The fight wasn't just for legal validation. It was for connection, for presence, for the chance to reclaim my role as a father and a man capable of love, not just success. And as we waited, I understood that the coming days, the proceedings, the conversations, the judgments, they would all be measured against this simple, undeniable truth. My daughter had seen me. She had recognized my efforts, my love, my presence. And for the first time in a long while, I saw myself reflected back through her eyes, not as a failure, not as an absentee father, but as someone worth believing in. The next moment, the next chapter, would test that belief. It would challenge everything I thought I knew about love, responsibility, and redemption. But for now, I held my daughter close and allowed myself the rarest gift, the quiet, steady pulse of hope, fragile but alive, beating in rhythm with her tiny hand in mine. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and rattles your chest. My daughter's small fingers hovered over the tablet, the screen glowing faintly, holding the moment in her hands like it was fragile glass. I watched her, heart hammering, chest tight, every instinct telling me this was the most important thing I would ever do, and that failure now would not just cost me respect, it could cost me the one thing that truly mattered: my daughter's sense of security, and maybe even her faith in me. The judge inclined her head. "You may proceed," she said. Her voice carried calm authority, but beneath it I could sense the curiosity, the subtle weighing of every action in that room. My daughter pressed play. The first image was mundane, almost ordinary, me reading her favorite story on a Saturday morning, sunlight spilling across the living room floor. My daughter, tucked under a blanket, listened with wide-eyed fascination, her little hands clutching the corners. I smiled at the screen, remembering the feel of her warm, soft hair against my arm, the way she would giggle at the ridiculous voices I made for the characters. But as the video played, the ordinary transformed into something profound. Each clip was a testament, not just to moments of joy, but to presence. Me helping her tie her shoes when she was frustrated. Me encouraging her on a drawing she insisted was not good enough. Me cheering quietly as she finally rode her bike without training wheels. These weren't moments of perfection, they were moments of attention, of love, of being fully there. And for the first time, I realized that this was what mattered most. The courtroom watched, breath held. My wife's face, so composed before, was shifting. The tight line of her mouth softened slightly. I caught a fleeting glance from the judge, a small tilt of the head, a pause, the way she was absorbing not just the footage, but the emotional weight behind it. I felt my daughter glance up at me, small, nervous, yet proud. Her eyes were saying what words could not. This is him. This is my father. This is the man who loves me. And as the video continued, memories flooded me in a torrent I hadn't anticipated. I remembered the nights I had stayed up reading her stories long past bedtime, pretending not to be exhausted. I remembered sneaking her little treats when she thought I was too busy to notice. I remembered holding her hand through her first dentist visit, her first school performance, her first heartbreak over a lost toy. Each memory was amplified, reflected back through the lens of her small, unwavering attention, proving that the care I had thought invisible had mattered more than I could have imagined. The judge finally spoke. "Mr. Anders," she said, voice measured but not unkind, "this video, it is compelling. Can you explain your role in these moments?" I took a deep breath, feeling the tremor in my chest. I wasn't here to argue about past mistakes. I wasn't here to justify myself in the abstract. I was here to speak truth, to be present, to show the man I was, not the man I had failed to be in their eyes. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor beneath it, this isn't a performance. It's not proof of perfection. It's proof of presence. I've made mistakes, many mistakes, but these moments," I paused, glancing at my daughter, who met my gaze with a mixture of hope and courage, "these moments show that I have always tried to be here for her. That I have always loved her, in ways that mattered more than accomplishments, meetings, or appearances. I may have failed in some ways, but I have never stopped trying to be her father." There was a long pause. My wife's eyes, normally sharp and critical, flickered with something I couldn't immediately name, regret, perhaps, or recognition, or the faintest hint of understanding. I felt a small surge of hope, fragile but tangible, that maybe she saw what my daughter saw. I glanced down at the tablet as my daughter nudged it slightly toward the judge. She whispered, barely audible, "See, Daddy?" I knew they'd understand. Her words, so simple, cut through the fear, the guilt, and the anxiety. They reminded me why I was here, why I had fought through the self-doubt and sleepless nights, to be recognized not just as a father, but as the father who mattered, the father who loved, the father who showed up even when the world seemed to pull me in every other direction. The judge nodded slowly, as if absorbing not just the evidence, but the emotional weight behind it. "This video will be considered as part of the proceedings. I appreciate the honesty and transparency it reflects. Mr. Anders, your daughter's testimony is compelling." A small, almost imperceptible relief coursed through me, but it didn't fully wash away the tension. There was still work to do, conversations to have, questions to answer. But for the first time since the divorce papers arrived, I felt a glimmer of validation. My love, my presence, my effort, even imperfect, had been seen. My wife finally spoke, voice measured but softer than I had expected. "I see now that you have tried in ways I may not have noticed. That doesn't erase the past, but," she paused, her gaze flicking to our daughter, "it shows there was love. There is love. And that matters." I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. The acknowledgement, quiet and understated, was enough to begin healing the wounds that words alone could not fix. I realized that this wasn't just about legal validation, it was about recognition, about emotional truth, about showing that presence and love, even when buried beneath years of absence, still had weight. As the proceedings continued, small details became magnified in my mind. The way my daughter's small hand occasionally brushed mine. The way the judge leaned slightly forward, attentive. The subtle shift in my wife's posture, from defensive to contemplative. Each detail reinforced the idea that love, expressed through small, consistent acts, could break through even the most formal of walls. When the video ended, the courtroom remained still for a moment longer, the silence heavy but charged. My daughter looked up at me with eyes full of hope and quiet triumph. She had been the bridge between past neglect and present recognition, between fear and courage, between despair and possibility. "Thank you," I whispered to her, my voice trembling slightly, though not with fear. "Thank you for showing me." She squeezed my hand, and in that small gesture, I felt an entire lifetime of guilt, hope, and love converge. The courtroom, the judge, my wife, the lawyers, they all faded for a moment. It was just her and me, and the undeniable truth that had been there all along. I had loved her, I had tried, and now, finally, it was seen. The judge cleared her throat. We will take a short recess before continuing. Mr. Anders, please be seated. I sat down slowly, still processing the surge of emotions. Relief, pride, fear, hope, they all collided inside me like waves. My daughter leaned against me, small and trusting, and I realized that the next steps, whatever they were, didn't feel quite so insurmountable. As we left the courtroom briefly for the recess, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. I had been exposed, vulnerable, and yet I had never felt more alive. My daughter had reminded me, in the simplest and most powerful way possible, that love and presence were what truly mattered. That mistakes, though painful, could be acknowledged, and that effort, however flawed, could be recognized. I looked down at her, the small hero who had orchestrated this revelation without fully understanding the magnitude of her actions. "You were amazing," I whispered. "Absolutely amazing." She smiled modestly, as if she had only done what any daughter would do. But I knew better. She had given me a chance, a rare and precious opportunity to reclaim my identity, to reconnect with my wife, and to prove that the man she believed in, and that I wanted to become, was real. As we returned to our seats, I felt a thread of calm weaving through the chaos of the morning. I didn't know the final outcome yet, and I knew the legal battle was far from over. But for the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt the fragile, luminous thread of hope. A reminder that presence, honesty, and love, however small or imperfect, could change everything. And I realized that the fight ahead, whatever form it took, was worth it. Because the moment had already begun to shift something deeper, the recognition that being present, being real, being the father my daughter saw, mattered more than all the arguments, the pride, and the fear in the world. For the first time since the divorce papers arrived, I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to fight, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with truth, with love, and with presence. And that, I knew, was only the beginning. The courtroom air felt heavier after the video. It wasn't just the legal formality anymore, it was charged with something raw, something unspoken, something that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with the truth we had just revealed. I could feel it, like a vibration through the polished wood floors beneath my feet, through the walls, through every eye that had watched my daughter's small, brave act of honesty. My wife looked at me then, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I saw something in her I hadn't expected. Not anger. Not disdain. Something softer. Vulnerable, maybe, or perhaps it was just recognition. A faint acknowledgement that the man she thought she knew, the man she believed had prioritized everything over family, had actually been trying in ways she hadn't noticed. "Mr. Anders," the judge said, her tone measured, "we've seen the video and heard your testimony. But I want to understand your wife's perspective. Please, explain your feelings here, if you wish." My wife's lips pressed together, and I could see the tension ripple through her body. She looked at me, not at the audience, not at the judge, but at me. And in that glance, I felt years of frustration, miscommunication, and distance condensed into a single moment. She began, voice quiet, unsure. "It's not that I doubted your love for her, for me even. It's just, I couldn't see it before. I was angry, frustrated, tired, and I convinced myself that your absence meant indifference. But this video, it shows another side. The side I refused to see." Her words hit me like a wave. Not relief, not yet, but clarity. Finally, something real. Finally, honesty that didn't need to be argued, explained, or defended. My heart tightened, and I had to swallow hard to keep my voice steady. "I understand," I said slowly, letting the weight of every unsaid apology hang in the air. "I've failed in so many ways. I wasn't always present, I wasn't always patient, I didn't always show up the way you or she deserved. But I've never stopped trying, even when it wasn't obvious. Even when I was blind to what mattered most." My daughter shifted slightly beside me, her small hand finding mine. She squeezed gently, a reminder that the smallest gestures sometimes carry the heaviest truth. The judge nodded, absorbing the exchange. It seems we're witnessing a recognition of truths long neglected, she said, her voice calm, measured, yet somehow infused with the gravity of the moment. Mr. Anders, is there anything you wish to say to your wife now? I drew a deep breath, the kind that feels like it carries the weight of years. I want you to know, I began, voice low but steady, that I've never stopped caring. Not for you, not for her. I know my mistakes have hurt both of you deeply. And I know that words aren't enough. But I want to do better. I want to be the man I should have been all along. The man you both deserve. Her eyes softened, glistening with emotion I had long forgotten existed between us. I can see that, she whispered. It's not too late, is it? I shook my head, a small, almost imperceptible smile breaking through my tension. No, not too late. Not if we try. Not if we start now. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Confrontation wasn't about proving who was right or wrong. It wasn't about assigning blame or dredging up past failures. It was about recognition, acknowledgement, and the willingness to face our truths together. The fight wasn't against each other. It was against our own assumptions, our fears, our inability to see what mattered until it was almost too late. I felt the courtroom breathe with us. The judge, the lawyers, even my wife's attorney seemed momentarily suspended, watching this fragile bridge of understanding form between two people who had once been fractured by pride, misunderstanding, and absence. Then my wife spoke again, more clearly this time. I never realized how much effort you put into being present for her. All these years, I thought I had to protect her from you being too busy. And maybe I misjudged. Maybe I failed to see what was right in front of me. Her words were a mirror to my own reflections, a validation I hadn't dared hope for. I swallowed hard. I understand, I said again. And I don't want to waste another moment. I want to be present in every way I can. For her, for you, for our family. I'm ready to do the work, even if it takes time. My daughter shifted, looking up at us with a mixture of pride and relief. I could feel her small, trusting gaze pierce through the layers of adult complications and remind me why all of this mattered. She had orchestrated this revelation, unwittingly perhaps, but with perfect timing and insight. In a way, she had forced all of us to confront the truth we had been avoiding, that love, effort, and presence matter more than pride, ego, or superficial accomplishments. The judge leaned forward slightly. It appears that both parties have begun to recognize the value of presence and honesty in this situation. This is not the conclusion of the case, but it is a critical turning point. Mr. Anders, your actions, and your daughter's testimony have influenced this process in a significant way. I nodded, letting the words sink in. Significant. Not complete. Not perfect. But important. Validation, not victory. And in that moment, I realized that this was exactly what I needed, not applause, not acknowledgement from strangers, not legal triumph, but recognition from my family, from the people whose lives mattered most, that I had not been absent in the ways that counted. My wife's eyes softened fully now, and I dared to hope. I want to try, she said. I want to see if we can make this work, if we can focus on what matters. Tears stung my eyes, but I held them back. Instead, I offered a small, steady smile, a smile that carried years of regret, hope, and determination. We will, I said firmly. We can. We must. For her. For us. The judge cleared her throat, signaling that the proceedings would continue later, giving everyone a moment to reflect. The room felt lighter somehow, though the tension had not fully dissipated. It was a fragile truce, a fragile bridge, but it existed, and that was enough to begin rebuilding. Outside the courtroom, my daughter ran ahead, her laughter small but joyous, echoing in the hallways. I caught up to her, kneeling to her level. You were incredible, I whispered. I couldn't have done this without you. She smiled, the kind of smile that carries both pride and innocence. I just wanted them to see you, Daddy, she said softly. I knew they had to. I pulled her close, hugging her tightly. And they did. They did see me. And more importantly, I saw myself, the man I needed to be for you. Walking to the car, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Confrontation had stripped away pretenses, exposing raw truth and vulnerability. But it had also created space for something new: recognition, understanding, and the first steps toward real reconciliation. I reflected on what had happened in the courtroom, the way our confrontation had evolved from tension to acknowledgement. I realized that the hardest battles aren't fought in courtrooms or offices or even on spreadsheets. They're fought within. Against pride. Against fear. Against the narrative we've constructed about ourselves that hides the truth of who we really are. And in that realization, I understood that redemption wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about erasing past mistakes. It was about presence, effort, and the courage to confront truth, however uncomfortable. It was about showing up when it mattered most. And for me, that meant being fully present for my daughter and acknowledging the cracks and failures that had almost taken her trust from me. By the time we reached home, a sense of fragile hope had settled over me. I knew the battle wasn't over. There were still legal proceedings to navigate, conversations to have, and emotional bridges to repair. But I also knew something deeper, that for the first time in a long time, I was facing these challenges not as a man running from failure, but as a man willing to confront it head-on. As I tucked my daughter into bed that night, I held her hand a little longer than usual. Her trust, her courage, her insight had been the catalyst for this transformation. I whispered softly, almost to myself, "Thank you for showing me the way, for reminding me who I am, and for giving me the chance to be the father you've always known I could be." And in that quiet moment, with her small hand resting in mine, I realized that confrontation had led to clarity. Fear had led to recognition. And even though the journey ahead was still uncertain, I felt ready. Ready to fight. Not against my wife, not against the world, but against the parts of myself that had allowed absence, distraction, and pride to take precedence over love, presence, and family. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt like a man reclaiming his life. And I knew that the next chapter, the resolution, the emotional closure, the realignment of our family, was just beginning. The courtroom felt different that morning. The tension was still there, thick and palpable, but it carried a new energy, a sense that something fundamental had shifted. I had shifted. The weight of guilt and doubt still lingered in my chest, but beneath it was a steady pulse of resolve. I was no longer just reacting. I was present. I was aware. I was ready to take ownership of my life, my choices, and my role as a father. I looked at my daughter, small hand in mine, her eyes bright with anticipation and trust. She had already done more to move hearts in that room than I could have ever imagined. Her courage had become my anchor. My wife sat across from me, her expression softer now, a subtle acknowledgement that she was willing to see what I was capable of, not just what I had failed to be. When the judge called the session to order, I felt a surge of clarity. This wasn't about legal technicalities or winning arguments. This was about presence, authenticity, and reclaiming a role I had allowed fear and distraction to erode. I straightened my shoulders and let the breath I had been holding for months out in a long, steady exhale. "Mr. Anders," the judge began, "we have considered the evidence, the video testimony, and the statements from both parties. Before we proceed with formal conclusions, is there anything further you wish to present?" I took a deep breath, feeling every eye in the room on me. The truth I carried wasn't just for the court, it was for myself, for my daughter, and yes, for my wife. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "There's something I need to make clear. Not as a legal point, but as a truth I want to live by from this moment forward." I glanced at my daughter. She nodded slightly, as if giving me permission to speak what I had rehearsed 1,000 times but never fully owned. "I have made mistakes," I began, voice steady, filled with both remorse and conviction. "I have failed to prioritize what truly matters. I have allowed work, distractions, and my own fears to take me away from the moments that define a father, a husband, a human being. But I have learned, and I am here to change that." The courtroom was silent, every face fixed on me, absorbing the weight of what I was admitting. My wife's eyes glistened with the faintest shimmer of tears, a mix of understanding and relief. My daughter's small hand squeezed mine again, grounding me, reminding me that this wasn't about perfection, it was about presence, courage, and action. I want to be present, I continued. I want to support her, guide her, celebrate her, and be the father she deserves. I want to support my wife as a partner, not just a bystander. I know the path ahead is not easy, but I am committed to it, fully and without reservation. The judge nodded slowly, her expression one of quiet approval. Your acknowledgement is noted, Mr. Anders. It appears that the efforts and presence you have demonstrated, especially with your daughter, carry significant weight in the consideration of this case. Something inside me shifted then. It wasn't a legal victory I felt, it was a personal one. The empowerment I had been seeking wasn't about proving myself to anyone in that room. It was about reclaiming my identity, embracing responsibility, and committing to presence and authenticity. I realized, in that moment, that I was no longer a passive participant in my own life. I had stepped into the arena fully, willing to face the consequences, willing to take the lead in my own emotional and relational journey. I turned slightly to my wife. I know I can't undo the past, I said softly, but I want to build the future. A future where we are honest, present, and connected. Where our daughter sees both of us as people who love, respect, and prioritize her and each other. Her lips quivered, and for a moment, I thought she might respond with skepticism or restraint. Instead, she said quietly, almost to herself, I want that too. Relief washed over me, tempered by the awareness that words alone wouldn't heal everything. The real work would come later, at home, in daily life, in the small, persistent acts that make love tangible. But the commitment had been made, and the acknowledgement had been heard. That, I realized, was the true climax of this journey. Not a victory declared by a judge, but a declaration of intention, responsibility, and empowerment. The judge called for a brief recess, allowing everyone to process the moment. Outside the courtroom, I breathed deeply, the air feeling lighter somehow, though the tension of months and years lingered faintly. My daughter's small hand remained in mine, and I realized that she had been the catalyst for everything, the bridge between fear and empowerment, doubt and clarity, absence and presence. I knelt beside her. You know, I whispered, you've given me more courage than I ever thought I had. More than I even knew existed inside me. She tilted her head, eyes shining. I just wanted them to see you, she said simply. To see the real you. Her words struck me like a revelation. That was all it had ever been about. Not proving, not defending, not performing, but simply being seen. And now that I had been, I understood that empowerment wasn't about winning arguments or avoiding mistakes. It was about being fully present, acknowledging truth, and committing to act with integrity and love every single day. When the courtroom reconvened, the proceedings continued with a different energy. The judge, the lawyers, my wife, all moved with a subtle shift of respect and consideration. My declarations had changed the dynamics. The tension that had defined the prior sessions had evolved into a cautious optimism, a recognition that we were all navigating the truth together. I realized then that self-empowerment wasn't a single moment. It was cumulative. Each act of honesty, each acknowledgement of failure, each decision to step forward rather than retreat, added to it. I had been disempowered by absence, guilt, and fear for years. But here, in the crucible of confrontation and acknowledgement, I felt the quiet, steady rise of agency, the ability to shape my life and relationships actively, rather than be swept along by circumstance or emotion. The courtroom's formalities blurred around me as I focused on the most important faces, my daughter and my wife. In them, I saw the reflection of what I wanted to be: steady, present, responsible, loving, and courageous. And for the first time in months, I believed I could live up to it. The judge's final words that day, though procedural, resonated deeply. Mr. Anders, your acknowledgement, presence, and commitment to change will be considered. This is not just a legal matter, but a profound demonstration of personal responsibility and growth. I exhaled slowly, letting the words sink in. Growth, responsibility, presence. All the things I had feared were lost, all the things I had doubted I could reclaim, they were suddenly tangible. Not just concepts, but actions, choices, and intentions I could carry forward. As we left the courtroom, the sunlight felt warmer, brighter, as if the day itself had shifted in response to our internal transformation. My daughter ran ahead, laughing with the unburdened joy of a child who knows she has done something meaningful. My wife followed at a slower pace, contemplative, but the tension between us had thinned, replaced with the quiet possibility of reconciliation and understanding. I walked beside them, hand on my daughter's shoulder, chest still tight but filled with a resolve I hadn't known before. The climax wasn't a dramatic flourish or an explosive confrontation. It was subtle, quiet, internal. It was the recognition that empowerment comes not from external validation but from presence, accountability, and the courage to act in alignment with truth. I realized then that the next chapter, resolution, rebuilding, emotional restoration, wouldn't be easy. But it would be real. And I was ready. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was not just surviving the consequences of my past mistakes. I was actively shaping a future defined by honesty, love, and presence. As we stepped out of the courthouse, I glanced at my daughter. Her eyes shone with trust, pride, and the quiet wisdom that only a child can carry. She had reminded me what mattered. She had reminded me who I wanted to be. And in that clarity, I felt the quiet, steady fire of empowerment ignite inside me, ready to guide every choice I would make from that day forward. The final session of the hearing felt different than any other day I had entered that courthouse. There was no longer the raw tension that had made my chest feel like it would burst, no longer the sharp edge of anxiety that had kept my thoughts spinning in spirals of doubt and fear. Instead, there was a quiet clarity, a sense that whatever came next, I was no longer the man I had been at the beginning of this ordeal. I had faced myself, my failures, and my fears, and I had begun to reclaim my presence, my identity, and my life. My daughter walked beside me, her small hand wrapped securely around mine, her steps confident despite her size. She had carried so much weight in this journey, more than any 7-year-old should have to bear. Yet here she was, smiling faintly, eyes wide with the quiet triumph that comes from being both witness and catalyst to something larger than oneself. I felt a surge of gratitude and awe. She had shown me what truly mattered, the power of presence, the impact of consistent love, and the courage to speak truth even when the world seemed unyielding. My wife walked behind us, slower than my daughter but steady, measured, contemplative. Her face bore the traces of nights spent reflecting, grappling with her own fears, frustrations, and disappointments. But there was also a softness now, a willingness to see not just my mistakes but the effort, intent, and growth that had emerged from them. I realized that the emotional landscape between us had shifted dramatically. What had once been a chasm filled with resentment and miscommunication was now, however fragilely, a bridge formed by acknowledgement, honesty, and the willingness to try again. When we entered the courtroom, the judge acknowledged us with a nod that seemed to carry weight beyond mere formality. The room was still, expectant. Lawyers sat poised, but even they seemed to sense that the true resolution here wasn't found in law alone. It was found in the quiet but powerful transformation of a man confronting his past and choosing a new path. "Mr. Anders," the judge began, "we have reviewed all evidence, testimonies, and statements. The video presented by your daughter, along with your own admissions and reflections, demonstrates a commitment to presence, honesty, and growth. While legal decisions will be formalized, it is clear that significant emotional progress has been made." I nodded, absorbing her words, but I realized something important. The weight of her judgment was not what mattered most. What mattered was the transformation I had cultivated within myself. The acknowledgement of my daughter and my wife, the reclamation of my presence, the courage to face past mistakes without defense or evasion, these were the true victories. My wife looked at me then, her eyes soft, searching, filled with a mix of hope and caution. "I see the effort," she said quietly, "and I see the man I think you can become. I can't promise everything will be easy, but," she paused, voice trembling slightly, "I want to try. I want to believe in what you've shown me." I swallowed hard, emotion rising but controlled. "I want that too," I said, voice steady. "I want us to move forward with honesty, presence, and love. No illusions. No pretending. Just truth and effort, every day. My daughter, perched on the edge of the chair beside me, looked between us with wide eyes. "See? I told you they'd understand," she whispered. Her small voice carried a profound truth, that presence, honesty, and courage could bridge even the deepest divides. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt an internal release. A letting go of the heavy, suffocating guilt that had defined me for so long. I realized that resolution wasn't about perfection or erasing past mistakes. It wasn't about winning legal arguments or satisfying societal expectations. It was about presence. It was about showing up consistently, authentically, and with intention. And in that presence, even flaws and failures became opportunities for growth and connection. The judge continued, outlining the final procedural matters. The legal resolution would require time, formalities, and decisions, but it no longer felt like the ultimate measure of my worth. I had faced confrontation, shown vulnerability, and asserted my commitment. I had begun the process of earning back trust and demonstrating love in tangible ways. And that, I realized, was the point, to reclaim my role as a father and as a partner, not for approval from the world, but because it was the right, meaningful thing to do. After the hearing, we stepped into the hallway together. Sunlight streamed through the tall courthouse windows, casting warm patterns across the floor. My daughter skipped ahead slightly, her laughter pure, unburdened. My wife walked beside me, silent but not distant, thoughtful but not guarded. And I walked with them, feeling the gravity of the past months lifting, replaced by the possibility of something real, sustained, and intentional. I paused for a moment, letting my daughter take my hand fully in hers. "You know," I whispered, "you changed everything today. You reminded everyone, especially me, of what truly matters." She looked up at me, eyes shining. "I just wanted them to see you, Daddy. To see the real you." Her words echoed in my mind. That was it, the truth that had guided this entire journey. To be seen, to be recognized for who I was and what I could be. Not perfect, not flawless, but present, loving, and accountable. That was the essence of self-acceptance. That was empowerment. That was life. Later, as we walked to the car, my wife finally spoke again, softly but firmly. "We'll need to rebuild trust, to communicate better, and to prioritize her more than anything else," she said. Her words weren't demands, they were invitations. Invitations to continue the work, to act with integrity, to live in alignment with the truths we had finally confronted. "I agree," I said, meeting her gaze. "And I will do whatever it takes. Not just for the courtroom. Not just for appearances. But for us. For her. For the family we can still be." We drove home in quiet reflection. The city hummed around us, indifferent to our personal transformation, yet somehow more alive, more hopeful, more tangible than it had felt in years. I looked at my daughter in the rearview mirror, her head resting slightly against the car seat, eyes closed in brief rest after the emotional intensity of the morning. And I felt a protective, nurturing surge of commitment that went beyond words. I would show up. I would persist. I would not fail. Not because I feared consequences, but because I loved with the full measure of my being. At home, I watched my daughter play quietly in the living room, small movements full of life and trust. I realized that presence was not a single act, it was continuous. It was in the small gestures, the attentiveness, the shared laughter, the bedtime routines, the gentle encouragements. It was an ongoing commitment to show up, every day, for the people who mattered most. I sat quietly, reflecting on the past months, the shock of the divorce filing, the creeping anxiety, the sleepless nights, the courtroom confrontations, the fear of losing connection. And I realized something profound. The journey had not been about legal validation or external approval. It had been about reclaiming myself, my values, and my priorities. About embracing the man I could be, rather than the man I feared I had lost. When my daughter noticed me watching, she smiled and ran into my arms. "Daddy," she whispered, "thank you for being here." And in that embrace, all the uncertainty, fear, and regret melted away, replaced by a quiet, steady sense of self-acceptance. I was not perfect. I would still stumble. But I was present. I was accountable. I was loving. And that, I realized, was enough to begin rebuilding what had been strained. Enough to move forward, intentionally and honestly, in every aspect of life that truly mattered. That night, as I tucked her into bed, I whispered a promise, not just to her, but to myself. I will be here. I will stay present. I will love, I will act, and I will be the father and the man you both deserve. She closed her eyes with a contented sigh, trusting me completely. And for the first time in a long time, I trusted myself completely too. I knew the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, decisions, and moments of doubt. But I also knew that the path I had chosen, grounded in presence, accountability, honesty, and love, was one I could walk with confidence. I had faced my past, confronted my mistakes, reclaimed my identity, and now, finally, embraced the man I could be. In that quiet room, with my daughter asleep and my wife nearby, I understood the profound truth. Resolution isn't an endpoint. It's a state of presence, self-acceptance, and intention. And with that understanding, I knew I had already won the most important victory of all.